She was born into privilege, an aristocratic family, a life of comfort and opportunity. He was a man marked by a violent past, struggling in the shadows of society. Together, they disappeared, carrying with them a fragile new life, a baby born into a world that would never know her. For weeks, the nation searched, desperate for answers, desperate for hope. But what began as a story of a couple on the run soon spiraled into something far darker. A story of neglect, secrecy, and the heartbreaking death of a baby who never had a chance to live. This is not just the story of a disappearance. It's the story of a life taken too soon, of systems that failed, and of a family forever haunted by choices that led to an unimaginable end. On this episode of The Deadly Diaries, we unravel the haunting case of Constance Marten and Mark Gordon and explore how a run from the law became a tragedy no one could stop. Welcome to The Deadly Diaries, where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime. In the early evening of January 5, 2023, police were called to a burning car abandoned on the hard shoulder of the M61 near Bolton. Inside the wreckage, officers found £2,000 in cash, 34 cheap mobile phones, and a woman's passport. But it was what lay on the back seat that would shock them most: a placenta, carefully wrapped in a towel, revealing the existence of a newborn baby. The passport belonged to Constance Marten, and the man with her was Mark Gordon. Both were already known to social services, and their sudden disappearance ignited a nationwide search, making front-page news across the country. For the next 2 months, through bitter winter cold, the couple went to extraordinary lengths to evade capture. Despite access to money, they lived rough in a cheap tent, scavenging through bins just to survive. Every day the tension grew, and with it, the fear that the tragedy unfolding in secret would only get worse. When they were finally arrested at the end of February, the baby was nowhere to be found. Both refused to tell police where she was, hiding the devastating truth. This was not their first child. Constance and Mark had 4 other children, all removed by authorities and placed into care. And within days of their arrest, police made a grim discovery in a shed in Brighton, near where the couple had been caught. Inside a little bag for life, buried under soil and rubbish, lay the body of a baby girl, just a few weeks old, wrapped in a pink sheet, and a life ended far too soon. Constance Marten was born into privilege, part of a wealthy family with close ties to royalty. She would often tell friends that, as a child, she had played with Princes William and Harry. Mark Gordon, in stark contrast, was the son of a nurse who had emigrated to the UK from the Caribbean, growing up far from the world of aristocracy. Even as teenagers, their lives took dramatic and divergent paths. One travelled to Nigeria, drawn into the secrecy of an evangelical church, while the other was sent to a Florida prison, convicted of rape, a brush with the law that would leave a permanent mark on his life. The story of how Constance Marten and Mark Gordon's lives would eventually collide, descending into chaos and tragedy, begins long before they were born, in the aftermath of World War II. In late November 1949, St. James's Palace played host to a dazzling society wedding attended by the King and Queen themselves. The bride was the Queen's goddaughter, a glamorous heiress who owned one of England's most beautiful country homes, Crishall House. A decade later, she gave birth to a son, Napier Marten. Educated at Eton College, Napier served as a page of honour to Queen Elizabeth II, a role reserved for the teenage sons of Britain's nobility. He later married socialite Virginie Camus in 1986, and the couple had 3 children. Their eldest, a daughter born in May 1987, was Constance, known affectionately to almost everyone as Toots. Mark Gordon's mother, Sylvia, arrived in the UK as part of the Windrush generation. She married Lookall Satchell, also from Jamaica, and together they had 4 children. By the time Sylvia became pregnant with her 5th child, Mark Gordon, born in 1974, her marriage was already over. Gordon's sister, Karen Satchell, later described her younger brother as a shy boy who could sometimes be a little mischievous. She said she had never seen him get into a fight or show any real aggression as a child. Yet behind this quiet exterior, a darker path was forming. While still young, Gordon's mother left her job as a nurse at the Chrysler car factory in the Midlands and moved to the United States, eventually settling in Florida. It was here, in Miami, aged just 14, that Mark Gordon committed a brutal crime, a turning point that would foreshadow the violence and chaos that later marked his life. U.S. court papers reveal that in the early hours of an April morning in 1989, Mark Gordon broke into the home of his 30-year-old neighbor, armed with garden shears and a kitchen knife. Dressed in black, with a stocking mask pulled over his face, he threatened the woman, warning that if she screamed, he would kill her young children sleeping in the next room. For 4.5 hours, he held her at knife point and committed a horrific act of sexual violence. In the days that followed, a police sheriff patrolling the neighborhood discovered a nylon stocking with eye and nose holes outside Gordon's house, leading to his arrest and questioning. Gordon initially pleaded guilty, but later withdrew his plea and stood trial. At his sentencing hearing in 1990, the victim urged the court to impose a severe term, emphasizing the need to prevent him from harming anyone else. Gordon, aged just 15, was sentenced to 40 years in prison, a sentence meant to reflect the severity of his crime and the danger he posed. While Mark Gordon was behind bars in Florida, Constance Marten, 13 years his junior, was growing up far removed from his world in Dorset. She attended St. Mary's in Shaftesbury, a private girls' school where she developed a reputation as something of a rebel. Around the age of 7, her parents separated. Her father reportedly left for a journey of spiritual discovery in Australia, while her mother was pregnant with their 4th child and later remarried. After finishing school in 2006, Marten and her mother traveled to Nigeria to visit a church known as the Synagogue, Church of All Nations, in Lagos. Her mother, by then known as Virginie de Cellier, soon returned to the UK, while Constance remained behind, becoming a disciple of the church. During her time at the church, Constance Marten became acquainted with a fellow disciple named Angie, who has since left the church. Angie remembers Marten as bright, witty, compassionate, funny, kind, and fiercely independent. All the female disciples, including Marten, lived together in the same dormitory. They were subjected to public meetings where they were forced to denounce one another, often enduring hunger and severe sleep deprivation. Angie later described the environment as one of terror, a place where psychological torment, physical punishment, spiritual control, and sexual abuse were all part of daily life. Though Constance was part of this world, there is no evidence to suggest that she herself suffered the abuse that so many others endured. After 4 months, Constance Marten was expelled from Scone and returned to the UK. She enrolled at Leeds University to study Arabic and Middle Eastern studies and spent a year in Cairo, further expanding her world. While still a student, Marten caught the attention of Tatler magazine, which featured the 21-year-old as its Babe of the Month. In the January 2009 article, she recalled a party thrown by a viscount, describing it as a debauched feast from ancient Greece, and mentioned plans to get a tattoo of a tortoise. 6 years after leaving Lagos, Marten reached out to her old friend Angie on Facebook. She reflected on her time at the church, admitting that she had never spoken about it to anyone and struggled to come to terms with her experiences. She confessed that it had taken years to get back to normal, and that she had once refused to believe the church was a cult. After graduating from university, Constance Marten began working as a researcher at the Al Jazeera News channel and even attempted to make a documentary about the Synagogue, Church of All Nations in Lagos. By 2015, however, she had left journalism behind and was training to become an actress. Among her drama school friends, Marten spoke openly about being the black sheep of her family. She remained estranged from her parents, she said, yet maintained a close relationship with one of her brothers, holding on to that connection even as other family ties frayed. But in early 2016, Constance Marten vanished. She stopped attending classes, ignored calls, and disappeared from social media. Friends were left bewildered. One recalled the shock of seeing someone so sociable suddenly vanish without a trace. She had simply disappeared, leaving no explanation, no warning, as if she had stepped out of the world entirely. Mark Gordon was released from prison in early 2010 after serving 20 years for his crimes. Upon his return to the UK, he was placed on the sex offenders register. His sister, Karen Satchell, says he has always been guarded about his time behind bars. She explains that to this day he has never spoken about it, a silence he maintained, as a way of coping with the turmoil and trauma he endured during those years. Constance Marten says she first met Mark Gordon in an incense shop in Tottenham, North London. Her family met him early on, and from the start they were deeply apprehensive about the relationship. Yet by 2017, Marten and Gordon were backpacking across South America. When they returned to the UK, Marten, now in her 30s, was pregnant with her first child. Concerns for the baby began long before the birth. Marten missed antenatal appointments until she was 6 months pregnant, telling midwives she was living in a camper van. When she stopped attending altogether, medical staff issued a national alert, asking hospitals across the country to be on the lookout. But Marten and Gordon had already left London. Marten later said they moved to Wales to escape her family, who, she claimed, had hired private detectives to follow her because they disapproved of Gordon. As her due date approached, the couple lived in a tent near a supermarket car park in Carmarthen. When Marten went into labour, she arrived at the hospital displaying signs of growing paranoia. She gave a false name, spoke with a fake Irish accent, and claimed to be from the travelling community. Staff, remembering the national alert, called the police. A violent struggle ensued. Officers, assisted by other fathers in the maternity ward, had to use CS spray to restrain Gordon. He was arrested and later sentenced to 20 weeks in prison for assaulting 2 female officers, missing the first weeks of his new baby's life. With her partner behind bars, Marten stayed in a placement for mothers and babies needing extra support. But questions soon arose about her ability to care for her child. Social workers found bottles of wine in her room and warned of the dangers of falling asleep with the baby on her chest. Within 6 months, a supervision order was issued, allowing social services to monitor the child closely. It marked the beginning of a long, fraught journey through the family court system. Marten and Gordon often represented themselves instead of hiring lawyers, lied in court, failed to appear at hearings, and appeared to deliberately avoid giving evidence. The warnings were mounting, but the couple's determination to evade oversight was relentless. By late 2018, Marten and Gordon were back in London, moving between addresses, and leaving behind unpaid rent on more than one occasion, according to landlords. Former neighbours described a couple who seemed without employment, rarely ventured outside, and whose arguments sometimes erupted into violent, blazing rows. After the birth of their second child, social services became involved once more. But it was an incident in early 2020 that drew serious concern. While 14 weeks pregnant with their third child, Marten fell from a first-floor window. When the ambulance crew arrived, Gordon initially refused to let them in, forcing the police to be called. Marten spent 8 days in hospital, though, thankfully, her unborn baby was unharmed. Upon discharge, she fled to Ireland with her 2 children. Yet, when she returned, social services took them into care. Marten and Gordon have never regained custody. Marten told authorities that she had been attempting to fix the TV aerial when she fell, but a family court judge later concluded, on the balance of probabilities, that it was Gordon who caused the fall. In February 2021, the judge wrote that the couple had put their relationship above all else, viewing every offer of support as hostile. Their obsession with each other, it seemed, left little room for the welfare of their children or anyone else. Neighbours recall the police calling several times in the weeks leading up to the birth of Marten, and Gordon's third child being told to let us know if you hear the sound of a baby. 2 weeks after the birth, the child was removed by social services. For a time, Marten and Gordon were allowed to visit their children in care. They would bring music, presents, and comfort. They sang and danced with the children, and Gordon even planted apple seeds in the contact centre's garden, one for each member of the family. But the visits began to falter. The couple missed sessions without explanation, leaving the children confused. Eventually, they stopped coming altogether. By May 2021, Marten had given birth to a 4th child, who was removed after just a week. 8 months later, in January 2022, a family court judge made a definitive decision. Despite vivid snapshots of what could have been a loving, integrated family, all 4 children, each under the age of 10, would be permanently removed. At the last minute, Marten offered to separate from Gordon to regain custody. The judge, however, doubted she would follow through. Samantha Yelland, a senior Crown prosecutor involved in the case, said, when given the choice of considering what is right for the children and what is right for themselves, they picked themselves. They are besotted with each other, to the extent they prioritize each other over their children. In September 2022, Marten was pregnant once again. Fearing the authorities would take this child, she and Gordon abandoned their southeast London home, again leaving unpaid rent behind, and began meticulously planning their disappearance. Marten had been quietly stockpiling cash, and over the next 4 months the couple moved, constantly between Airbnbs, never staying in one place long enough to be traced. They concealed the pregnancy with extraordinary care. Had their car not erupted into flames on the motorway in January 2023, the existence of their newborn might have remained entirely hidden. Following the car fire, the couple flagged down a passing motorist asking to be taken and to bring their newborn to the nearest services. From there, they moved stealthily across the country, travelling by taxis through Liverpool, then Harwich in Essex before reaching London, and eventually arriving in Brighton on 8 January, where they lived in a fragile, makeshift tent, enduring the harsh depths of an English winter. As the nationwide search for the missing family intensified, sightings of Marten and Gordon with their baby began to surface, captured on CCTV cameras. Disturbingly, the newborn was often seen inadequately dressed for the bitter winter cold, sometimes without socks, without a hat, and with no blanket. On one occasion, the couple bought a baby buggy, but it was wholly unsuitable for a newborn and was abandoned the same day. From then on, they carried the baby tucked inside Marten's jacket, keeping her close, but offering little protection from the elements. After more than 7 weeks on the run, police finally tracked Marten and Gordon to Hollingdean, Brighton. On February 27, 2023, officers arrested the couple, who refused to answer repeated questions about the whereabouts of their missing child.
Where's the child, madam? Where is the child, please?
Daddy bear.
On March 1, 2023, the body of the couple's baby was discovered. Forensic investigators believe she had died weeks earlier, on 9 January, though the exact cause of death could not be determined. Authorities revealed on 3 March that the child had been wrapped in a plastic bag and hidden inside a shed on an allotment near the location where Marten and Gordon were arrested. Later that day, the couple appeared before Crawley Magistrates' Court, facing charges of gross negligence manslaughter, concealing the birth of a child, and perverting the course of justice. During the hearing, the baby's name was revealed to be Victoria. Marten and Gordon were remanded in custody ahead of their next court appearance at the Old Bailey in central London. Throughout their Old Bailey trial, Marten and Gordon went to extraordinary lengths to try and sabotage their retrial, including refusing to turn up to court, talking to each other during proceedings, and replacing multiple barristers. Marten had a total of 14 barristers who represented her at some point during the process, and Gordon eventually represented himself in the proceedings. Marten denied that her baby had been exposed to dangerous conditions, insisting that Victoria had been kept warm inside her jacket. But the court heard that one night she fell asleep while breastfeeding, slumping over the infant, who was later found limp with blue-tinged lips. The couple tried to resuscitate her, but she did not respond. Gordon told police, "It was one of the worst things I ever saw in my life." In the days that followed, they carried Victoria's body in a carrier bag, at one point taking her to the beach. Too weak to bury her, Marten even considered cremation but hesitated. The prosecution described Victoria as the 5th child of 2 chaotic parents who had already lost 4 children to care. Her exact birth and death dates remain unknown. She had never seen a midwife or doctor and was never given a safe, warm home. Her parents' choices endangered her life and ultimately led to her death. On 14 July, the jury returned their verdict. Unanimously, Marten and Gordon were found guilty of manslaughter, the most serious charge. On the September 15, 2025, Constance Marten and Mark Gordon were sentenced to 14 years behind bars. Both were ordered to serve 2/3 of their time in custody before the possibility of release. And for Mark Gordon, his history of violence came back to haunt him, earning him an additional 4 years on extended license, a chilling reminder of the danger he posed, even beyond prison gates. At the heart of this story is a baby girl who never had a voice and never stood a chance. Hidden away, her short life became the price of secrecy and control. Constance Marten and Mark Gordon's actions left behind not mystery but devastation, a tragedy that can never be undone. And while the courts have spoken, one truth lingers. The smallest victim, the one who should have been safest, was the one who paid with her life. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Deadly Diaries. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to stay connected with stories that matter. And remember, if you or someone you know is in danger, please seek help. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop asking why.